That summer was the best one of my life. It was exciting, it was just supposed to be about beating the heat. But what started as another afternoon in the pool quickly turned into something I never expected. My dad had always been this silent, reliable figure in my life, there but always at a distance. We swam together almost every day that year, but this time felt different. The way he watched me, the way the air between us seemed charged with something unspoken, it was like I was seeing him for the first time. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. It was the hottest summer we'd had in years, the kind where the heat clung to your skin even in the shade, making everything sticky and unbearable. So naturally, we spent most of our time at the pool, cooling off whenever we could. The pool was our refuge, a place where we could both be alone together without the pressure of forced conversation. I always felt like my dad was a different person when he was in the water. There was something about the way he moved, so effortlessly, so gracefully, like the water was a second home to him. He taught me everything I knew about swimming, from the basics to advanced strokes, but we rarely talked beyond that. It was as if the water gave us permission to just exist side by side, no words necessary. That day started like any other. The sun was beating down relentlessly, and the only logical thing to do was hit the pool again. I remember grabbing my towel and heading out to the backyard where the pool shimmered like an inviting oasis. My dad was already there, sitting at the edge, feet dipped in the water, looking out over the horizon as if he were contemplating something far beyond my understanding. There was always a distance between us, an invisible line that neither of us ever dared to cross. But today, something felt different. I slid into the water quietly, letting the coolness envelop me as I floated on my back, staring up at the cloudless sky. For a while, neither of us spoke, content with the silence, until my dad broke it. "You've gotten better," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Your strokes, they're more controlled." It was a simple comment, but coming from him, it felt like praise. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, feeling the water ripple around me. He was watching me, I could feel it. But it wasn't the usual quick glance of a parent keeping an eye on their kid. It was different. It was more intense, almost curious. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between us, but I didn't know what or why. The air felt heavier, charged, as if we were both waiting for something to happen, but neither of us knew what that something was. We swam together for a while, laps back and forth, always maintaining that silent, unspoken distance between us. But it was clear that whatever barrier had been there before was starting to weaken. Then something strange happened. As I was swimming past him, I felt his eyes lingering on me a little longer than usual. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But I could sense it when I glanced over. His expression was unreadable, his face calm, but his eyes, there was something behind them, something I couldn't quite place. And that was when I realized it, things were not going to stay the same between us. The pool was no longer just a place to cool off, it had become something more, a stage for something that neither of us had anticipated. But I didn't know how to feel about it, confused, intrigued. There was an odd mix of emotion bubbling up inside me, emotions I hadn't expected. We stayed in the pool longer than usual that day, swimming side by side, the water lapping softly against our bodies. But it wasn't the physical closeness that felt strange, it was the emotional proximity that had started to form between us, like we were suddenly seeing each other for the first time. As we both floated there in the silence, I could feel the tension between us, unspoken and unresolved. There was more to this moment than either of us were willing to admit, but neither of us had the courage to say anything, not yet at least. So we just let the moment linger, suspended in time, knowing that whatever was happening between us, it was only just beginning. The days that followed were strange, it was as if a veil had been lifted between us, but neither of us knew how to talk about it. My dad and I continued our daily swims just like always, but something unspoken hung between us, thickening the air. The silence we used to share comfortably now felt loaded, each lap across the pool leaving me with more questions than answers. The weather didn't help, it had become almost unbearably hot, the kind of heat that made you feel like you were walking through a wall of steam every time you stepped outside. The pool became more of a necessity than a luxury, and we found ourselves spending hours there, floating in that cool blue world where things felt both normal and not. But the pool wasn't just a refuge from the heat anymore, it had turned into the only place where this invisible thread between us could stretch and twist, and where I could try to make sense of it. Every time I caught him watching me out of the corner of my eye, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, and yet I didn't shy away. There was something about his gaze that pulled me in, though I couldn't explain it. I had never thought of my dad in any way other than as, well, my dad, the man who helped me with my homework, who sat quietly at the dinner table, whose approval I'd always sought but never really received. And yet now, in the pool, he seemed different. He wasn't just my dad anymore, he was someone else, someone I wanted to understand, even though I wasn't sure why. The tension between us had started to build slowly at first, like a pot coming to a simmer. It was in the way our conversation stopped just short of becoming something real, how our movements around each other seemed more deliberate, more measured. Even the way he swam felt different. It felt more casual, more controlled, like he was aware of every move I made, every ripple I created in the water. It was a Friday afternoon, the sun high in the sky, casting long shadows across the pool deck. I had been swimming laps for a while, pushing myself harder than usual, trying to burn off the strange energy that had been building up all week. My dad had been sitting by the edge, watching me as he often did lately. His silence was heavier than usual, like he was trying to say something without words. After my 10th lap, I stopped, breathing hard, wiping the water from my eyes. I glanced over at him, expecting him to make some comment about my form or maybe even offer some quiet praise, but he didn't. Instead, he just looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't look away. There was something in his eyes that made my pulse quicken, something I couldn't quite name but that sent a shiver down my spine despite the heat. For a moment, the world outside the pool seemed to vanish. It was just us, the water lapping softly against the edges, the air thick with something neither of us could put into words. Then, breaking the silence, he stood up, moving toward the pool with the same quiet confidence I'd always admired. He slid into the water next to me, the distance between us suddenly feeling much smaller than it had before. I could feel the warmth of his body even though we weren't touching, the space between us charged with something unspoken. "You've been swimming hard," he said finally, his voice lower than usual, almost a murmur. "You're really pushing yourself." I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Just trying to stay in shape, I guess." He nodded, though I could tell that wasn't the answer he was looking for. We floated there for a while, the water gently moving us back and forth, neither of us saying anything, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was thick, loaded with things neither of us were ready to say out loud. Then he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "You know we don't talk much." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement, but it hit me harder than I expected. He was right, we didn't talk, not really. Our lives had always been marked by silence, by things left unsaid, but now, in this moment, it felt like all those years of quiet were pressing down on us, demanding to be broken. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I never knew what to say." He smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind that spoke of missed opportunities, of things we'd let slip through our fingers. "Me neither," he admitted, and for a second, I saw something in him I'd never seen before, vulnerability. The tension between us seemed to hum, vibrating through the water, making it hard to breathe. Then, without thinking, I moved closer to him, just a little, just enough to bridge the gap that had always been there. He didn't move away. If anything, he seemed to lean in ever so slightly, like he was waiting for something to happen. But nothing did, not yet at least. The rest of that day passed. In a blur, we swam together for a while longer, neither of us saying much. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive quiet we'd lived in for so long. It was something else, something that felt almost intimate, but not in a way I could understand, not yet. That night, as I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the pool, about the way he had looked at me, the way the air between us had felt charged with something I didn't have a name for. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining things, but deep down I knew better. Something had changed between us, and there was no going back. The next day, I woke up feeling restless, anxious in a way I couldn't quite explain. The tension that had been building between us all week seemed to have reached its peak, and I didn't know what to do with it. I tried to go about my day as usual, but everything felt off. My mind kept drifting back to the pool, to the way he had looked at me, the way the water had felt between us, cool and heavy. By the time the sun started to set, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my towel and headed out to the pool, hoping the water would calm me down, help me make sense of the storm inside my head. But when I got there, I found him already waiting, sitting at the edge of the pool just like he had been the day before. His feet dipped in the water, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For a moment, I thought about turning back, about pretending I hadn't seen him, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he looked so lost in thought, or maybe it was the fact that I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening between us wasn't over yet. So I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, and slid into the water beside him. We floated there in silence for what felt like hours, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Every time I glanced over at him, I could feel my pulse quicken, my breath catching in my throat, and yet I couldn't look away. Eventually, he broke the silence, his voice low and steady. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear whatever it was he had to say, but I nodded anyway, unable to find my voice. He hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words, and then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking a lot lately about us, about how things have changed." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "What do you mean?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see the truth in his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted, "but something's different between us, and I don't think it's something we can just ignore anymore." The air between us seemed to crackle with electricity, the water around us suddenly feeling too warm, too close. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, letting the silence stretch between us. He didn't say anything else after that, and neither did I, but as we floated there, the side by side, I knew that whatever was happening between us was only just beginning. The days passed like a slow rolling wave, dragging us deeper into something neither of us could explain. It was as if the air itself had changed between us, charged with an unspoken understanding that we were no longer the same people we had been. The pool became our sanctuary, the place where the rest of the world faded away, leaving only us and the quiet pull of the water. After that conversation, if you could even call it that, something shifted. I didn't know how to face it, how to face him, but I couldn't stay away. Every time I thought about avoiding the pool, my mind wandered back to him, his words, his eyes, the unspoken tension that hovered between us like a secret neither of us could keep much longer. It was a Thursday when it finally happened. The day started off like any other. The sun was high in the sky, the kind of relentless heat that made staying inside unbearable. I had spent most of the morning pacing around the house, trying to distract myself, but nothing worked. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something I wasn't ready for but at the same time couldn't stop. By mid-afternoon, I had given up on pretending that things were normal. I grabbed my towel and headed outside, my heart already racing in my chest. I told myself I was just going for a swim, just to cool off, but I knew better. I knew what was waiting for me. Sure enough, when I reached the pool, he was already there, sitting on the edge with his feet in the water, just like always. But there was something different about him today. He looked more relaxed, more at ease, as if he had finally made peace with whatever it was that had been hanging between us. I hesitated for a moment, standing at the edge of the pool, watching him. He hadn't noticed me yet, his eyes fixed on the rippling water in front of him, lost in thought. For a second, I considered turning back, walking away before things went any further, but I couldn't. There was something pulling me toward him, something I couldn't resist. I slipped into the water as quietly as I could, the coolness enveloping me like a second skin. For a few minutes, I just floated there, watching him, waiting for him to acknowledge my presence. Finally, he turned his head and our eyes met. It was like a jolt of electricity shot through me. His gaze was different today, intense, focused, and for the first time, unguarded. He wasn't hiding anymore, and neither was I. The air between us felt heavy, almost suffocating, but I didn't want to escape it. I wanted to dive deeper into whatever this was. We swam in silence for a while, side by side but not touching, the water moving us in slow, lazy circles. But the silence wasn't the same as before, it wasn't filled with hesitation or confusion. It was charged with anticipation, a quiet understanding that something was about to happen, something we couldn't stop even if we wanted to. At one point, we stopped near the shallow end, standing. Just a few feet apart, the water lapping gently against our bodies. The tension between us had become almost unbearable, like a rubber band stretched to its limit, waiting to snap. And then, without warning, it did. He moved toward me so quickly and so suddenly that I barely had time to react. His hand brushed against my arm, a touch so light it could have been accidental, but it wasn't. It was deliberate, careful, like he was testing the waters, waiting to see how I would respond. Our eyes locked, and in that moment, everything else faded away. The world outside the pool, the years of silence between us, the unspoken rules that had always kept us apart. It all vanished, leaving only the two of us standing in the water, unable to resist the pull that had been building between us for weeks. He leaned in slowly at first, as if giving me a chance to stop him, but I didn't. I couldn't. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts as he got closer until finally, his lips brushed against mine. It was so soft, so tentative, like he was afraid of crossing a line we couldn't come back from. But the second our lips touched, something inside me snapped. I couldn't hold back anymore, and neither could he. The kiss deepened, the tension between us finally breaking as we gave in to everything we had been holding back. It was slow at first, almost hesitant, but it quickly grew more intense, more desperate, like we were trying to make up for all the time we had wasted, all the things we had never said. His hands found their way to my waist, pulling me closer, and I didn't resist. I couldn't. My own hands moved up to his shoulders, holding on as if I were afraid of letting go, afraid that if I did, this moment would end and we would go back to the way things were before. But I knew deep down that there was no going back, not after this. We couldn't control ourselves anymore. It was as if the floodgates had opened, and everything we had been trying to keep inside came pouring out all at once. The kiss became more urgent, more intense, our bodies pressed together in the water, the world around us disappearing as we lost ourselves in each other. I didn't know how long we stood there wrapped up in each other, but it felt like both an eternity and an instant at the same time. All I knew was that I didn't want it to end, that I wanted to stay in this moment forever, where nothing else mattered except for him and me. Eventually, we broke apart, both of us breathing hard, the water still gently lapping around us. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. But there was no regret in his eyes, no hesitation, just the same quiet intensity that had always been there, simmering just beneath the surface. We didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know, that whatever this was between us, it wasn't just a momentary lapse. It wasn't something that would go away. It was real, and it was something we both had to face. For a little while longer, the silence between us was comfortable now, but charged with the knowledge of what had just happened. There was no going back. When we finally climbed out of the pool, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the water. We wrapped ourselves in towels, neither of us saying much as we headed back inside. But the tension that had always been there between us was gone, replaced by something deeper, something that neither of us could deny anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind replaying everything that had happened, I realized that this was just the beginning. Whatever had started between us in that pool, it wasn't over, it had only just begun. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. After that moment in the pool, my life felt like it had split into two parts, the one before, where everything was simple and predictable, and the one after, where nothing felt certain anymore. My thoughts were consumed by what had happened, and every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the weight of his gaze, the warmth of his touch, the way the water had carried us both into something we couldn't come back from. We avoided talking about it at first, as if pretending that things were still the same would somehow make it true. But every time I saw him, every time we shared a glance or brushed past each other in the house, the air crackled with an unspoken understanding. We had crossed a line, and there was no undoing it. But despite the weight of everything that had happened, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. In some strange way, I felt like I had finally stepped into something real, something I had been waiting for without even knowing it. The awkward silences at the dinner table, the long stretches of time where we barely said a word to each other, those moments had given way to something else, something deeper. And yet, it wasn't easy. There were moments when doubt crept in, when I wondered if we had made a mistake, if this thing between us was wrong somehow. But those thoughts never lasted long because every time I thought about pulling away, every time I imagined going back to the way things had been before, I realized I didn't want that. I couldn't go back to that empty silence. It wasn't long before we found ourselves back at the pool, as if it were the only place where we could be honest with each other. It had always been our sanctuary, our place to escape the world, and now it had become something more, a place where the lines between us blurred, where we didn't have to pretend anymore. One evening, just as the sun was beginning to set, we found ourselves there again, the cool water lapping at our skin, the sky above us streaked with shades of pink and gold. There was something calming about the way the world felt in those moments, as if time itself had slowed down, leaving us suspended in the quiet, just the two of us. We didn't swim much that night, instead, we floated together in the shallow end. The silence between us was comfortable. The table was no longer filled with the tension that had once been so overwhelming. It felt different now, like we had reached some kind of understanding, an unspoken agreement that whatever was happening between us didn't need to be explained, it simply was. He was the first to speak, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon, the last rays of sunlight reflecting off the water, "about what happened." I nodded, my heart racing. I had been thinking about it too, every day, every night, but I didn't know what to say. Words felt too small, too clumsy to capture what had happened between us. "I don't know how to explain it," he continued, his gaze finally shifting to meet mine, "but I know that I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." His words hit me harder than I expected. There was something raw, something vulnerable in the way he said it, and for the first time, I realized just how much this had affected him too. He wasn't just my dad anymore, he was someone I was beginning to understand on a deeper level, someone I cared about in a way that went beyond the roles we had always played in each other's lives. "I don't want to lose you either," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the water rippling softly around us filled the space, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It wasn't the kind of calm that comes from certainty, but the kind that comes from acceptance, from realizing that some things don't need to be understood or explained, they just are. We stayed like that for a while, floating in the water, the silence between us no longer uncomfortable but peaceful, almost soothing. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I felt like we had found some kind of balance, some way to navigate the complicated feelings that had been building between us for so long. But life, as always, had a way of reminding us that nothing is ever that simple. The next morning, as I sat in the kitchen eating breakfast, my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from a friend, someone I hadn't seen in weeks. The message was simple, casual, but it sent a jolt of reality crashing through the strange bubble I had been living in for the past few days. "Pool party at Jenna's this weekend. You in?" For a moment, I just stared at the message, my mind racing. A pool party? It seemed so ordinary, so far removed from everything that had been happening between my dad and me. And yet, it was a reminder that life outside the pool still existed, that there were other people, other things waiting for me. I hadn't thought much about my friend since that night in the pool. It was like I had been living in a different world, one where nothing else mattered except for him and me. But now, as I stared at that text, I realized that I couldn't stay in that world forever. I looked up from my phone and saw him standing in the doorway, watching me. Question in his eyes, though he didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I knew what he was thinking because I was thinking the same thing. "Are you going?" he asked after a moment, his voice careful, measured. "I don't know," I admitted, setting my phone down. "I haven't seen them in a while." He nodded, his expression unreadable, and I could feel the distance between us widening again, like a rubber band stretching too far, ready to snap. But this time, it wasn't the kind of tension that felt like a slow buildup of something inevitable. It was the kind of tension that made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into the unknown. "I think you should go," he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. "You need to be with your friends. You need to have a life outside of this." There was a weight to his words that made my chest tighten. He was right, of course. I couldn't stay wrapped up in this thing between us forever. But the thought of walking away, of leaving this strange new connection we had built, filled me with a kind of fear I hadn't expected. "I don't want to leave this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You're not leaving anything," he said softly, stepping closer. "But you need to live your life. We both do." The way he said it, so calm, so rational, made it sound so simple, but it wasn't. Nothing about this was simple. "I'll think about it," I said finally, knowing that I couldn't avoid reality forever. The next few days passed in a blur. I went to the party, saw my friends, tried to act like everything was normal, but it wasn't. Nothing felt normal anymore. I found myself drifting through conversations, barely listening, my mind always wandering back to him, to the pool, to the way everything had changed. When I got home that night, the house was quiet, the lights dim. I found him sitting on the back porch, staring out at the pool, lost in thought. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, and I realized then that no matter how hard we tried to act like things were normal, they never would be. Not really. I stepped outside, joining him on the porch, and for a while, we just sat there in silence, the pool glistening in the moonlight. It felt like everything had come full circle, like we were right back where we had started, but different somehow. Stronger maybe, or maybe just more honest. He looked at me then, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the water. "It's not easy, is it?" I shook my head, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "But I don't think it's supposed to be." We sat there for a long time, the quiet between us filled with the weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still to come. And in that moment, I realized that whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges we might face, we would face them together. Because no matter how complicated things had become, one thing was certain: we were in this together, for better or worse, and that was enough.